All right, we're ready for Proverbs chapters 11 and 12 in our study of Proverbs. And we'll review where we've been quickly and then get underway with chapter 11 and how chapter 11 develops. Chapter 1 was about what wisdom will and will not do. Chapter 2, we must seek after wisdom. Wisdom must be sought. Proverbs 3, the value of wisdom. Chapter 4, wisdom is the principal thing. Chapters 5 through what chapter go together as a unit? 5 through 7 is a unit of chapters. 5 dealt with sexual immorality versus marital faithfulness. Chapter 6, various warnings of wisdom, one of which is about the strange woman of the adulteress. Chapter fits with chapter 5 and 7. So chapter 7, warnings about that strange woman. Chapter 8, wisdom does what? Excellent things, inviting. And then chapter 9, here was a good summary of what chapters 1 to 9 is about. You have wisdom personified as this woman on the one side of the street, and then here is folly, another personified as a woman on the other side of the street. Both have their feast, and both are inviting you to come. Which one are you going to go to? Now, chapter 10, last time we dealt with various contrasts. I'll go ahead and mention that, and we'll see the same kind of thing from that point on. Now, beginning in chapter 10, we mentioned this last time, and I want to mention it again. Some of you'd like to work on your own outlines. Others just don't care about that or not. That's fine. But if you're working on your own outline, let me tell you a little concept that I think you'll find helpful from chapter 10 till about chapter 30. I know there's 31 chapters, but about 30, 29 to 30. And what you'll find in that is that what we have in chapters 10, 11, 12, and 13 on down the line is just a collection of miscellaneous verses just piled together. When you open the chapter, just a pile of verses. And if you take those and sort those out in categories and put them on the shelf or put them in the drawer, put them in the notebook, however you want to view that, I think you'll find it helpful. And that's what we have when we get to chapters 10, 11, and 12. For example, you may have a proverb dealing with the tongue. And you don't have the tongue mentioned again for 10 more verses or 3 more verses. And you may have 4, or you may have 5, you may have 10. You may have wisdom versus foolishness. You may have warnings about money. And you may have 3 verses in that chapter, only 1. And so you pull these verses out and categorize them. I think you'll find it more useful. So that in the future, when you're studying through and you say, there is a proverb that deals with the tongue, and I'd like to know some of the Proverbs so you can look at chapter after chapter. There's 3 verses in this one, 2 in that one, 10 in that one, and 7 in this one, and etc. Make sense? That'll help you, I think. It's helped me. Hopefully it'll help you. All right, chapter 11 we call simply various contrast. Not all Proverbs do this. By that I mean you may have a chapter in Proverbs that doesn't have a lot of contrast, some contrast, but not a lot of contrast. This one is just full of contrast. And we'll see that in several of these chapters. So we're going to work through them by subject matter. And so I've already gone through, and for my purpose, you may organize it different, and pulled out verses from the pile and put them in different categories. So here's the first category I made, and that is honesty versus dishonesty. So let's go to question number 1 first, because it deals with this. What is a false balance and what is a just weight? In contrast, 11 and 1. All right? All right, that's true. Cheating versus honesty. Let's get verse 1. A false balance is an abomination to the Lord. A just weight is his delight. It has to do with honesty versus dishonest measures. For example, if you're selling something by volume or by weight and you adjust the scale to cheat your customer, And so it's dishonesty. It's an unjust weight. So you adjust the scale so that you're giving them less than a pound for a pound, or less than a gallon and selling them a gallon, whatever the case may be. And so that may involve lying, it may involve misleading, it may be misrepresenting, it may be hiding some product, but that's an unjust balance. But a just balance, fairness, God's delighted in. All right, let's go to verse 3. The integrity of the upright will guide him, but the perversity of the unfaithful will destroy him. What do you learn from that? You're better off if you tell the truth. I learned from verse 3 that a person who wants to do right, that honesty is their guide. Does that make sense? The integrity of the upright will guide them. And so it's not, oh, how much money can I make? Can I do more if I shade things? He's not worried about making more money, not worried about keeping his job, not worried about any of that. What he's worried about is just honest. It's honesty and integrity that guides. That's the principle that we're guided by. Make sense? All right? But the perversity of the unfaithful will end up destroying them. In other words, it comes back to bite them. It may bite them in this life, but eventually in the life to come. Let's get verse 18. It's another verse we threw into that category. The wicked man does deceptive work, but to him who sows righteousness will be a sure reward. What is verse 18 saying? All right, that's true. He takes wickedness and deception, and I think this proverb tells us things flow in both directions. Wicked people often do deceptive things. Deceptive people are automatically wicked people. Does that make sense? So show me somebody that's deceptive, somebody that's not honest, and I'll show you somebody that's wicked. All right, these are general principles. By the way, as we talk about categorizing these proverbs, you may have a proverb that fits into this category, but it also fits into another category. So again, like pulling out piles of verses, you pick up a verse and you say, well, that's more than one category. It's kind of like you can copy that, put it in this drawer, and you can make a copy of that verse and put it in another drawer over here, because it may deal with 2 principles, 3 principles, or 4 in that proverb. We'll see some of that as we go along. All right. We only list one verse here that contrasts pride versus humility. When pride comes, then comes shame, but with the humble is wisdom. What do you learn? I learned that those who are filled with pride are not wise people. Quite often, those who are filled with pride think they are. They think they're wise. They think not only they're wise, they think they are, put an ER on that, wiser than you. They're wiser than everybody else. And so I have wisdom you don't have. I have insight. And so they're filled with pride. But this text says a person filled with pride is just not wise. They don't have wisdom. They may have pride, but they don't have wisdom. But with the humble is wisdom. Show me an humble person, and they're not arrogant, they're not full of pride, and I'll show you a person that has some wisdom. All right, here's another category. When we get to verse 4, we find the category of riches versus righteousness. Sometimes there's a category of riches versus poverty. This one is riches versus righteousness. Which do you choose? So let's get verse 4. Riches do not profit in the day of wrath, but righteousness delivers from death. What's that say? What do you learn?
Riches is not going to save you in the day of judgment. Righteousness is you in the day of wrath. When God does judgment, if you're wicked, you will receive your reward. And if you're righteous, you will receive your reward. Well, it'll be the opposite.
All right, very good. The day of wrath probably points to the eternity, as Tim just observed. Some writers observe that this is just, as the Proverbs are, general principles. So whenever you hit a day of wrath, it may be you don't do your job and your boss is upset and ready to fire you. The fact that you have riches, you can't buy your way out of that. you're involved in immorality and you've stirred the wrath of a mate, your riches are not going to buy your way out of that. Riches just don't save you in the day of wrath, ultimately in the end of time. Now, verse 16, let's add that. Now, this one's quite interesting. A gracious woman retains honor, but ruthless men retain riches. You're going to learn something from this if you haven't studied it carefully. What does it say?
A gracious woman holds on to honor regardless. That wicked man, he's going to hold on to riches regardless of what he has to do.
Absolutely. I think he's contrasting two different approaches. There is the gracious, kind approach versus the ruthless, tyrannical kind of approach. And what he's saying, both get in the end what they want. Both in the end get what they want. So let's look again at verse 16. A gracious woman retains honor. That is, the gracious woman is not saying that men can't be gracious, but what it's saying is that women who are gracious in the end get what they are seeking because they had a gracious approach. But the ruthless man may get his money that he's after. But the contrast is between the two. By the way, this is the only proverb, and I didn't realize that till studying this passage this time. This is the only proverb that contrasts men and women. And in this case, the woman's conduct is superior. Now, women, when you get in an argument with your husband, you might remind him the only proverb that mentions men and women in contrast, put the woman on top and put her superior. And if you use that and it works, you can slip me $1 for giving you that piece of advice. But anyway, do what? All right, yeah. All right, I don't need that. But verse 16, I think the point is this graciousness gets you further down the line. And so I put that in the category of riches versus, but it has to do with the tongue and how you approach things. Now let's get verse 28. He that trusts in riches will fall, but the righteous will flourish like foliage. What does that mean? Yeah. I think he's talking about, the idea that it comes back to this destruction, but the person who depends on material things or money or success financially for life, and that is their life, that is their success, it'll ultimately bring their ruin. If not in this life, it will in the life to come. All right, let's look at another category. There's righteousness versus wickedness. This is always a large category in nearly every one of the chapters of Proverbs. Let's look at verses 5 to 8. We don't have time to deal with every single detail. Let's get some general principles. The righteousness of the blameless will direct his way aright. But the wicked will fall by his own wickedness. In other words, the wicked fall down because of what he does, but the righteous and the blameless. The King James uses the word perfect in the sense of the blameless. It means entire. He's complete. He does what God wants him to do. The righteousness of the upright will deliver him, much the same thing, but the unfaithful will be taken in his own lust. The wicked man dies in his expectation. When a wicked man dies, his expectation will perish, but the hope of the unjust perishes. What is verse 7 saying? Say again.
Verse 7.
Yeah, verse 7.
You have all the riches you have here on earth, and luxurious life, and can't take the money with you.
All right, that's true. When a person dies, whether wicked or righteous, the opportunity to do either one is gone. And in this case, his opportunity to do the bad is gone, and the hope of the unjust is perished. In other words, here's the happy memory of the righteous versus the rot of the wicked. Verse 8, the righteous is delivered in trouble, and it comes to the wicked instead. When you live righteous, there's a blessing and a reward. Trouble comes to those who are wicked. Let's get verse 10, verse 11. When it goes well with the righteous, the city rejoices. And let's get verse 11 and then the wicked perish. There is shouting. And by the blessing of the upright, the city is exalted, but is overthrown by the mouth of the wicked. What's 10 and 11 saying? There's another proverb that summarizes this in one statement. All right.
I think it also talks about kind of the widespreading effects of both. How far
Yeah.
that spread out.
It affects the city. It affects the community. It affects society. And I think that's the point. Righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. Nations that as a whole is permeated with ungodliness, the nation crumbles. The Roman Empire crumbled from within. So did Babylon. So is this country crumbling from within. Righteousness exalts a nation. I think that's the point of verse 10 and verse 11. By the blessing of the upright, the city is exalted. Well, cities are not righteous within themselves, but people can be within. So we see that principle. Let's drop down to verses 18 to 21. The wicked man does deceptive work, but to him who sows righteousness there is reward. Let's see, I'm going to skip a couple of verses here in interest of time. Look at verse 21. Now, this one's interesting. Though they join forces, the wicked do not go unpunished, but the posterity of the righteous will be delivered. What's that saying? All right. I think it's talking about the idea of wicked people working and joining forces together. I think it's the same principle of 2 Corinthians 6 of pulling together in the same yoke of sin. Do not be unequally yoked together. That's pulling in the same load of sin. That even though the wicked join together, they're not going to be unpunished. But though the posterity of the righteous will obviously be blessed. That principle is repeated time and time again. Let's drop down to 30 and 31 to finish that section. The fruit of the righteous is a tree of life, and he who wins souls is wise. What's that saying? Let's start with the first part of the verse 30. The righteous, the people who are living right, there's fruit that comes from that. In other words, there's results that come from living right. And the result, let's rephrase that. The result of living right is a tree of life. In other words, a tree of life produces more life, doesn't it? Produces good results. Perhaps that's implied in the next phrase, he who wins souls is wise. Let's take that second phrase standing alone and then we'll tie it with the first. What does that mean, he who wins souls is wise? All right, that's true. Absolutely true. Person who says, I try to use some wisdom and I don't try to influence people about religion and try to change their thinking. I just try to live right myself. And he thinks he's wise. He's foolish, because the person who seeks to win a soul is wise, the text says. Now, I think in the connection, the fruit of righteousness is a tree of life, and he who wins souls is wise. If you live righteous, part of the fruit that's going to be produced is winning souls, starting with our own families, starting with our own children. That shows wisdom indeed that we are trying to win souls. Now let's get verse 31. If the righteous will be recompensed on earth, how much more the wicked and the sinner? What's he saying? Yeah. Absolutely. There is reward now and in eternity. And if that's true concerning the righteous, how much more so is that going to be true? In other words, if the righteous benefit from the righteousness now and will eventually in eternity, how much more so will the wicked suffer and also pay a price in the future. Now, there's always a section, not in every chapter, but nearly every chapter, you'll find something about the tongue. And so it's a great problem. Only 2 verses have we put into this category, so let's go to question number 2. What does Proverbs 11, 9, 12, and 13 teach about the tongue? Yeah. Can destroy your neighbor's reputation. Anything else? Yeah. Yeah. The person who slanders thinks, I know some things you don't know, let me tell you. They're also revealing, I don't know much. Destroys your integrity, destroys your reputation, as well as the one you're trying to destroy. Let's get verse 9. The hypocrite with his mouth destroys his neighbor, but through knowledge the righteous will be delivered. All right, I learned a couple of things. One is slander and gossip can destroy someone's name and reputation. Would you agree with that? But, let's see what the but is. Through knowledge the righteous will be delivered. What's that saying? Bingo. The truth finally comes out, and the truth overcomes the lies and removes that damage that's done. Make sense? And it also then does some damage to the person who told the lie. So here's one who's doing the slander. That may defame you for a while, but when the truth finally comes out, then things look different. And you've seen that happen in your own life, that you heard something terrible, and then truth came out. Then you begin to look at the source of that information in a different light. And you look at the person they talked about in a different light as well, when you finally see the truth. And so what can you do when somebody's slandering your name? Just get the truth out. Just keep telling the truth. Keep defending your name. Paul did that himself. Now let's get at verse 12. I don't have verse 12 on the screen. It should be, he that is devoid of wisdom despises his neighbor, but a man of understanding holds his peace. Who has the English Standard? Do you have that, Kevin? Let's read verse 12 out of the English Standard.
Whoever belittles his neighbor lacks sense, but a man of understanding remains silent.
Yeah. The person who belittles his neighbor lacks sense. Doesn't have good judgment. Doesn't have wisdom. He belittles another. Defames their character. But a person of understanding or wisdom does what? Controls his tongue. He doesn't say everything he thinks. He doesn't say everything that he thinks ought to be said. He holds his peace. He doesn't belittle his neighbor. Make sense? Let's get verse 13 with that. A talebearer reveals secrets, but he that is of a faithful spirit conceals a matter. It says basically the same thing. What do you learn? Verse 13. Right. Just because I have information about someone that's unknown generally doesn't mean I have to tell it. A talebearer reveals secrets. It implies that there's some things that ought not be revealed. Some things I don't need to tell. Some things I don't need to reveal. It doesn't do any good to reveal that. But the person who is of a faithful spirit conceals a matter. Some things you don't repeat, you don't tell. All right, let's go further. Here's another category: wisdom versus foolishness. Let's get question number 4. Sue what?
I think the verse that we stole money goes back to prayer.
Absolutely. Let's get verse 15 here. First, at question number 4, what is 11:15 talking about? He who is of a surety for a stranger will suffer it, but one who hates being surety is secure. What's that mean?
Warning against standing good for others.
All right. Yeah. Becoming responsible for someone else's problems and their debts. Co-signing, as we would view it in our day. Serving as a surety for them. The person is saying, they don't trust me, so would you sign your name that you'll be responsible? And what you're saying is, I'm willing to take care of your problems. And the Bible warns against. It doesn't say it's sinful. It just simply says that's not always wise, and you'll end up paying in that. Now, let's get verse 12 in with that. I put it in this, it's wisdom versus foolishness, and we've already talked about the meaning of that, but the person who defames his neighbor is lacking sense and doesn't have judgment and doesn't have wisdom. Now, this one's interesting. 2 or 3 proverbs scattered throughout the book of Proverbs talks about this principle. So if you want to make a marginal note or electronic note on your tablet, you might do out beside verse 14 to see chapter 15 and 22. And then when we get to 15 and 22, guess what? We're going to come back and make a note to see chapter 11 and in verse 14. Where there is no counsel, the people fall, but in the multitude of counselors there is safety. What's that about?
Where there's no one to teach you, Donnie, you can learn if no one's teaching you, but if one is teaching you, then you have various degrees of, knowledge, wisdom, so you will learn from someone teaching you, especially in the spiritual sense. We're talking about Christians.
Okay, that's good. Good thought. What else do you learn from that? This is where the rubber hits the road right here. Absolutely. They're too proud, and they think perhaps their judgment is going to be the best judgment, so they don't seek any advice. I don't think we're talking in this context, though it may slightly be included. I don't think we're talking about where you know the difference in right and wrong. What should I do? We're talking about areas of judgment where there may be good judgment and bad judgment and judgment that's not real good, but it's not bad, but it's just, what should I do? Let's go down back to our verse. Where there is no counsel, the people fail, or they fall. But in the multitude of counselors, there's safety. When I seek advice from more than one, when I seek advice from more than just those that agree with me, finish my sentence.
They see a different perspective.
I may see a different perspective. Somebody else finish that sentence.
You also got to live with what's possible. In the end, when you seek counsel from all these people, then you got to live with the judgment that you do.
Yeah. It's not their fault, but you got to get there. Yeah, you got to live with that. That's a good point. What do you say about verse 14? In the multitude of counselors, there's safety. If I seek wisdom and advice from a multitude of people, I don't think that means that I've got to go to 1,000 people. But instead of just asking this one that I know is going to agree with me, I might ask several different people what they think, and they give me a variety of perspectives. The chances, finish my sentence, are I'm going to come out better. I'm going to find some gems of wisdom in that. What would you do? And Philip may give me, I'd do this. All right? So I'll go over here and I ask Tom, and he says he'd do just the opposite. Go over here to Ricky, and he gives me another perspective. And I'm going to have to take all of that together, and I'm going to more likely come up with some wisdom as I pool that. Does that make sense? In the multitude of counselors, there's safety. The more people you ask, the better off you will be. All right, let's talk about treatment and mistreatment of others. We're going to have to quickly work through this because I want to get to chapter 12. We've already talked about verse 9. Let me go back. I want to, we did talk about verse 9. Verse 12 and 13, those are mistreatment of others. And verse 16. I want us to look at verse 17 just briefly. The merciful man does good for his own soul, but he who is cruel troubles his own flesh. What's that telling him? Again, I think simply the similar principle to verse 17, though it's not identical to that. Graciousness or mercifulness, when you are merciful and gracious in dealing with other people, you're doing good for yourself. But cruelty is going to bring nothing but problems for yourself. Now, verse 29 in that same category, he who troubles his own house will inherit the wind, but the fool will be a servant of the wise of heart. What's that saying? think there's two principles. The person who troubles his household brings trouble to his house. In other words, he's going to inherit the wind. He sows to the wind, reaps the whirlwind, basically, is what it's saying. And then the fool will be a servant of the wise in heart. The fool becomes a victim of the person that's wise enough to manipulate him. You take a person that's foolish and doesn't use wisdom, and you take somebody that's wise, and it doesn't matter what you give one or give the other, eventually the wise person is going to be the leader controlling and taking care of and influencing the fool. Would you not agree with that? That's the point. And so he'll be manipulated or influenced by the one who has some wisdom. All right, here's outward beauty versus inward beauty. Did I have a question on that? I thought I did. Maybe I don't. Yeah, I do. Question number 3. Explain 11:22. Here's what 11:22 says. A ring of gold in a swine's snout, as a ring of gold is in a swine's snout, so is a lovely woman who lacks discretion. What on earth is that saying? Yeah. All right, makes her ugly. It's out of place. I think he's talking about a gold ring and a swine's snout. It's not saying you don't put a ring. You do put a ring in a swine's snout. If you've ever had hogs, you've done that. But it's not gold. It's a waste, but it's out of place. And so you don't put this golden ring there. That's just out of place for a hog, for a pig. It's out of place. So here's a woman at verse 22 who is lovely and beautiful and attractive, and yet she lacks sense. She ain't got any judgment. She doesn't have any wisdom. In other words, going with that outward beauty, there needs to be some inward beauty of wisdom, I think is the point to be made from that. Now then, 3 more things, or 3 more verses, and then we're done. Selfishness versus sharing. The one who scatters, and yet there's one that scatters and increases more. I think that's giving and sharing with others, is the idea of scattering there, because it's in the context. The one who withholds, that leads to poverty. So rather than holding back, share with others. Same principle, the generous soul shall be made rich. The one who waters will be watered himself. And so you scatter and you share is the principle, and not withholding grain, but you're willing to sell it. Instead of being selfish, be willing to share with others. So all of those are contrast. If you didn't take note of that, there's just contrast throughout. Honesty versus dishonesty, righteousness versus wicked, counsel versus no counsel, selfish versus sharing, various contrasts, Proverbs 11. All right, now let's go to chapter 12, various principles of life, and let's start with this, listening to instruction versus refusing. So let's see if we can get through what we can of these. Look at verse 1. This is interesting to me, that whoever loves instruction loves knowledge, but he who hates reproof is stupid. That you're just lacking wisdom, lacking judgment if you don't listen. That's all we need to say about verse 1. Verse 15, though, is interesting. The way of the fool is right in his own eyes, but he who heeds counsel is wise. Ties with what we saw a little earlier. And that is the person who thinks, I know what's best, my judgment is going to be best. Your judgment I don't need. I don't need instruction from God. I don't need instruction in anywhere. I'm pretty much smart enough to take care of myself. He's very much a fool. Let's move on. The righteousness versus the wicked. Again, a large category. We're just going to pick and choose some of these verses. Look at verse 2. A good man obtains favor of the Lord, and a wicked man, a man of wicked devices, he will condemn. Let's drop down to verse. This is interesting, verse 10. A righteous man regards the life of his animal, but the tender mercies of the wicked are cruel. What is that saying? All right. A righteous person.
God expects us to be good stewards of what we have, and that's part of it, taking care of it.
Take care of your animals. Yeah, take care of your possessions. A righteous man has enough kindness and care and concern. He takes care of his animals. He's not only not abusive to people, he's not abusive to his animals. He cares, but the tender mercies of the wicked people, when they're showing tenderness and their kinder side, it's still cruel. They don't care about themselves, they don't care about animals, they don't care about people. And so that principle is repeated time and again. Let's talk about family. Now, we could go on about righteousness versus the wicked, and I wanted to, but I want to get to another verse in just a moment. Verse 4, the family. The excellent wife is a crown of her husband, but she that causes shame is like rottenness to his bones. What's that saying? Yeah. A woman can make or break the man. Show me a good man who's doing a good work, and I'll show you he's got a good woman by his side. Now, there are exceptions to that, but that's the general rule. Show me a good gospel preacher who's been a success and done well, and I'll show you a good woman by his side. Show me some guy that's probably faltered and he didn't make it in preaching, and beside him may have been a woman that brought him down. That's happened time and time again. All right, let's go to the tongue. And I'm interested, I want to get down to verse, let me get ahead of myself here. That's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to get to verse, let's get verse 25 here on the matter of the tongue. The tongue is dealt with all throughout this, but this is interesting. Anxiety verse 25. Anxiety in the heart of the man causes depression, but a good word makes it glad. What does that mean? All right. Yeah, I think, and that's an excellent point. But I think he's saying worry is a heavy burden. Anxiety is a heavy burden. It causes depression. It causes people to feel down. So here's a heavy burden. It may be a burden of sickness. It may be a burden of family stress. It may be financial stress, whatever it may be. Worry causes depression. Anxiety causes depression. Well, what can I do? I'm not a doctor. I don't have medicine to give them. I don't know what to do. I'm not a psychiatrist, a psychologist. I can't help. Here's what you can do. A good word makes it glad. In other words, kindness just brings some cheer. Say, I don't know what to do to help. Just say some kind things to that person, and that cheers them. You say, I don't want to help. God said it would. I think I'll take him at his word on that. And so you know somebody that's down, somebody that's depressed, carrying a heavy burden, say something cheerful to them. Say something good, something encouraging we can use. Let's go back to the righteousness versus wicked. I want to focus at verse 26. The righteous should choose his friends carefully, but the way of the wicked leads them astray. I think we had a question on that. Yes, question number 10. What's this mean? Absolutely. Watch who you run with. Watch the crowd you're in. The righteous people choose their friends carefully. Now, verse 27 in this matter of laziness, this one's interesting as well. The slothful man does not roast what he took in hunting, but diligence is man's precious possession. What's that saying? Talking about laziness. Yeah, I think I was going to look at a different translation. Let's see what we're looking at. We're looking at verse what was that, 27? Just a second, I'll get it. And then we're going to be done. Proverbs 12:27. Yeah, the New Century, I don't have that. What does the English Standard say? Yeah, some translations render it as if he catches something, but he's too lazy to cook. He got out and hunted, and then he's too lazy to cook it. But most of the translations say that the NET says he does not. God's Word translation says a lazy man does not catch his prey. That's what I was looking for. He's too lazy to even go out and hunt. Either way, the point's the same. He either is too lazy to go hunt, or if he hunts and he catches it, he's too lazy to cook it. And so he doesn't get to eat of his prey. He wants to be a hunter and he wants to catch, but he's too lazy to go after it. And once he catches it, he's too lazy to cook it. And it's just talking about laziness. But the diligence of a man is his precious possession. All right, questions or comments? I know that's a hurried look at chapter 12, but again, here's various principles and gets us the gist of the Proverbs.